So today's topic, as you know, is developing speaking skills for B1 preliminary for schools and B2 first for schools. And this is the first of a series of 4 webinars. And today we're focusing on interactive communication. So that's 1/4 of our speaking exam criteria. So a really important and interesting topic for us today. As I said, we're joined by Greg. Greg is a very experienced teacher and teacher trainer. He's been preparing learners for Cambridge exams for 9 years, and he's based in Seville, Spain. And as well as teaching and training teachers, he is also very busy creating video content for language teachers. So we're really happy to have Greg here today to share his expertise with us. And just before we start, I have a few housekeeping notes for you. Lots of you will be familiar with these if you've come to our webinars before. You're already using the chat box, which is fantastic to see. Continue to do so because Greg will ask you throughout the webinar to participate and give answers and answer polls. So please do so using the chat box and not the Q&A box, which is separate. So if you have specific questions that you'd like to ask, write them in the Q&A box and we'll save those for the end to ask Greg, or I will be answering some as we go through the session. But for participating and general comments, things that you want everybody to see, please do use the chat box, okay? And after the webinar today, you will be sent an email. And this email will include a recording of the webinar, so you can go back and watch it again. And it will also include the slides, so you can go through them at your own pace and pick out the important information that you want. And you will also be sent a certificate. So you just need to download that certificate and add your name to it. We always get lots of questions about that. So you will be sent a certificate. Okay, and I think that is pretty much all I have to say. I'll be joining Greg again at the end for questions, and I might make an appearance within the presentation as well. So enjoy, and I'll see you afterwards. Over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Donia. Yes, I'd like to begin by saying thank you to all of you out there. It's great to see so many people from around the world joining us today. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you're from. And welcome to my session today on developing interactive communication at both B1 preliminary for schools and B2 first for schools level. As Donia said, I'm Greg Wagstaff. I'm a teacher and teacher trainer, normally based in Seville in the south of Spain, but I'm currently in Cambridge. And in addition to that part of my job, I'm also lucky enough to be one of 9 presenters for the Learn English with Cambridge YouTube channel, which depending on what kind of teacher you are, whether it's general English or exam English, there's videos for all kinds of classes there. And we're very close to the 100,000 subscriber mark. So please come along, tell your students about it as well, and subscribe. And yes, I'll see you there. But anyway, enough about me and more about today. So today, of course, we're talking about developing interactive communication in our classes. And today's session is going to be split into 3 sections, which are essentially the what, the why, and the how. Okay, what interactive communication already is, why it's important, and then finally, how can we develop it in our class? What kind of practical activities can we use? Today's session, as Donia said, it's very interactive. I'm going to be asking you to participate in tasks through the chat box or do polls. And that's how we're going to start today's session, actually, okay, with a poll. I'd like to get an idea of your experience regarding interactive communication. So there'll be a poll popping up on your screen shortly. Please just answer it with how confident are you that you know what interactive communication is and how to teach it, please. Okay, somewhere in the middle, leading at the moment with 40-odd%, fairly confident, 34%. I'll give you another 10 seconds or so, please. Just let me know how confident you are that you know what it is, and how confident are you that you know how to teach it. Okay, so the answers are slowing up there. So I'm just going to end it there. Thank you very much. So we can see that somewhere in the middle with 45% is the leading answer there. 32% are fairly confident, 9% very confident, and then only 3% are not confident at all. So thank you for your answers there. It's good for me to get an idea of what your experience is with interactive communication. And I would like to say that whatever your experience is, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to get something from today's session. So without further ado, let's go on to the first part of the presentation, which is, of course, the what. Okay, so interactive communication and oracy, what is it? Now, they're essentially the same thing. So let's find out what they mean. And this is where your first task comes in. So I would like you to use the chat box, please, to give me your answers on the following tasks. Could you please have a look at these two pictures? There's a newsreader there, and there's two ladies talking in the street. And then please comment with what's the difference between the two pictures below. Remember, of course, there's hundreds of differences, but from a language and speaking perspective, what's the difference from between these two pictures below, please? Okay, we've got some answers coming in. Okay, formal and informal. Okay, that's a really good start. Of course, the newsreader will be more formal, whereas us talking the street will be informal. Register. Okay, yeah, that's linked to formality again. Nice, really good answers. Thank you. Monologue and dialogue is another answer from someone. On the left, less interactive. Okay, yeah, of course, again, because it's a monologue. So yeah, it will be less interactive. I'll give you a few more seconds to get your answers in, please. Okay, what's the difference from these two pictures below from a language perspective, or specifically a speaking perspective, please? Jargon and formality. Of course, you'd expect there to be a lot more jargon in the picture on the left-hand side. So thank you for your answers there. We're going to stop it there. So, of course, we had answers like formality, informal versus formal, the use of jargon, monologues and dialogues. And it was actually that last comment that a few of you made, which is the difference that I want to highlight today. Okay, so on the left, we have a monologue, whereas on the right, we have a dialogue. So with that in mind, don't go anywhere from the chat box, because we're going to move on to your next task, please. Which is now, bearing in mind, we've identified that one of them is a monologue and one of them is a dialogue. Think about this. How does the nature of these different interactions affect the skills needed? You could either give a general comment or maybe list some speaking sub-skills that come with each type of interaction. Again, please. So just comment in the chat box. How does the nature of these different interactions affect the skills needed, please? Okay, so again, formalities being highlighted, which, yeah, the different levels of formality might affect the different skills needed. No listening needed in the first bit. Of course, yeah, that's the nature of a monologue. You're not actually interacting in direct dialogue with anybody else. Again, lots of people comment on the fact that, yeah, it's just there's no listening skills needed in the left-hand picture. Okay, quite a lot of comments about interaction on the right hand. Of course, yeah, that's a big difference between the two. The level of interaction and in terms of in a dialogue, you've got two people interacting with each other. So just a few more seconds then, please. Get your answers in. A general comment or some sub skills. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to stop that task there. So thank you. Answers we had were about, again, touching on formality and informality, the level of interaction needed, listening skills as opposed to speaking. Of course, on the left, again, we don't need listening skills, whereas on the right in the dialogue, we do. And it's actually the dialogue which I'd like to focus on, if you will. Now, I saw quite a few of you listing some speaking sub-skills that you would feel you would need in a dialogue. So when speaking to another person, lots of you listed these. In order to interact appropriately with someone, we might use some of the skills that you can see on screen now. So yes, these skills is what we use pretty much all of the time when we're engaging in a dialogue. And the other big theme that bonds them together is that these are actually examples of interactive communication and oracy sub-skills. Some may call them somewhat social skills, if you will. And so this leads nicely onto the definition that I would like to use today when talking about interactive communication and oracy. And that is quite simply the ability to successfully interact with another person. In all kinds of conversation, when we're involving the dialogue, there's a purpose to our conversation most of the time, and the ability to successfully complete that purpose, to successfully interact with another person, which is hopefully, which I'm sure these two ladies are doing in this picture here, you can see on screen, and then hopefully as well, these 4 candidates that are doing the exam too as well. So that's our definition, okay? But let's bring it more to life. Now that could be interpreted in lots of different ways, but I feel we need more details to establish exactly what we mean by interactive communication and oracy. So successfully interacting with another person. We can find more detail about what it is in the Cambridge Handbooks. Now, for those of you that don't know, in the Cambridge Handbooks, they have pretty much everything you need to know about the exam, including the marking criteria. And on screen now, you can see the marking criteria for the speaking exam, the 4 different categories of criteria. And of course, we're going to focus on interactive communication and the little box at the top, which is what our pupils need to be completing in order to get the best marks. So we can see within this criteria that while there are some differences, which I'm highlighting on screen there, there's common themes that are present in both levels in terms of interactive communication and oracy. Initiating, responding, maintaining, developing, and negotiating. We have 5 different general themes there within this definition of successfully interacting with another person. These are general skills that we should be seeing our pupils do, and they very much make up what interactive communication and oracy is. So we've looked at definition, then some general themes that should be present. What we're going to look at next is some interactive communication oracy sub-skills. So on screen now, you can see, of course, I've got 4 different skills, A, B, C, and D. Part of them are partly blocked out. I'm sure you've guessed already what I'd like you to do is now think about this definition: successfully interacting with another person, initiating, responding, all of those general themes, and then just complete them in the chat box, these sub-skills, please. Thank you. Donya's just put the link to the handbooks in the chat as well. The handbooks are totally free and easily accessible online. So thank you, lots of answers coming in. Lots of people putting offers for A. I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong just yet, but good start nevertheless. So yeah, please have a little think about this idea of successfully interacting with another person, and then complete the sub-skills that are on your screen now. Okay, making orders, offers, sympathy. I'm seeing sympathy a lot. Empathy, people are putting as well. Asking for opinions. Okay, a few more seconds then, please. Okay, let's see how you got on. There we go. So making offers, offering sympathy, responding to suggestions, and asking for opinions. Thank you for your answers. I pretty much, most of them were correct. So fantastic start, really well done. So if you're anything like me, whenever I get given a concept that might maybe a slightly abstract concept, the biggest way for me to understand it is to see context and see how it's real life contextualizations of it in class. And I think this is the beauty of showing you these interactive communication and oracy sub-skills today. Already, we've looked at some of these today, and this for me is really, really nice, but it's a real life manifestation of exactly what types of sub-skills should be occurring in your classroom in order for you to guarantee that you're developing interactive communication and oracy. So On screen now, we've got some sub-skills that you should be looking to develop as much as possible. And of course, I'm going to supplement it with the general themes: initiating, responding, maintaining, developing and negotiating, and of course, the overall definition: successfully interacting with another person. So there we go. That's the end of the first session in terms of establishing the what it is. Okay, it's a very social skill, the ability to interact with another person, the general themes and the sub-skills that you can see on screen now. Next, what we're going to do is move on to the why. Why am I here talking about it with you today? So let's have a look. The biggest reason is real world English, real life English. Now, if we think about the amount of times, the amount of occasions in which we speak in our lives, the overwhelming majority of the amount of the times we speak or words leave our mouth is in reciprocal situations, in dialogues. What that means is this interactive communication, bearing in mind that most of the times in which we speak is to another person or more persons, interactive communication is of utmost importance amongst our students. Quite simply, if we want them to be able to function in the real world and to effectively communicate with others, they need to have the skills of interactive communication and oracy. Yes, I'm seeing people that are commenting about rehearsal for the real world, and quite right, yes, that's what it is. And that's what Cambridge exams look to do. Interactive communication isn't in the exam for no reason, by magic. It's because it's looking to replicate those real world skills that our pupils are going to need. But where exactly can we find interactive communication developed in our exams? So allow me to show you the test format on screen now. So while they're different levels, B1 preliminary and B2 first for schools, the test format is near similar. The small differences are the ones that you can see on screen now. And of course, in terms of level of expectation, B2 first for school students are expected to produce a slightly higher quality of interactive communication. So in terms of where it's important, part 2, the individual long-term, it's important there. Notably, in the follow-up question, of course, you have one candidate describing a photo for a minute, and then the other candidate is asked about their opinion. That's an opportunity to react to what the candidate A said. So it's important there in terms of interactive communication. Parts 1 and 4, where each candidate is either engaging with each other or the examiner, of course, naturally needs interactive communication skills. And then notably, part 3, it's extremely important here. Quite simply, if your pupils don't have these interactive communication or oracy sub-skills, they're really, really going to struggle in this part of the exam. And don't just take my word for it, of course. If we look again in the handbook, the skills that are suggested that our pupils need, I'll give you a few seconds to read them on screen. But yes, the suggested skills that our pupils need, you can see they're engaging in discussion, working towards a negotiated decision, to turn take appropriately, the language of negotiation, collaboration, invite the opinions of others. It's quite clear that in part 3, our pupils need these interactive communication and oracy skills in order to do well. And yet, this is just a classic example. Of course, we're focusing on interactive communication today, but how the Cambridge exams, that's what they do. Okay, of course, they're there to give our pupils an English qualification. However, most importantly, they're there to prepare our pupils for real life. So that's the why as well. So we've looked at the what exactly interactive communication is. We've also looked at the why. Now, for the remainder of the webinar, what we're going to be looking at is some practical classroom activities. The how. Okay, how can we be looking to develop this in our classroom? So I've got several ideas, but we're going to start with something I've referred to several times already today, and that is the good old trusty handbook. Just before I do, actually, I just want to highlight that what I think is something really important is that in any activity that should be looking to develop interactive communication, quite simply, it needs to be collaborative. You need to have at least 2 students together, or maybe more, because quite simply, how can we develop the ability to successfully interact with another person if candidates or pupils are alone? There needs to be pair work or group work going on. And moving on from that, again, I don't think you can expect just to take 2 or 3 or 4 students, put them together and expect them, just say talk, and expect them to develop interactive communication oracy. I very much think that you need to think about your activities, tweak them, manipulate them to ensure that our pupils are developing those skills to the maximum level possible. So now we're going to explore some practical activities about how to do that. And like I said, yes, the good old trusty handbook. So yeah, these handbooks, they provide guidance, as I put on the screen there. Pretty much everything you need to know about the exam, whether it's format or whether it's marking, or what we're going to look at now, recommendations of what you should be doing in class. You'll find it on the handbook. I know that Donya's put the link in the chat a few times, but yes, if you Google them, if you Google Cambridge handbooks, they'll come up, and they're totally free for you to get. So yes, the handbook, as I said, of course, it's going to promote the idea that our pupils need to be working in pairs or small groups in order to develop this. But like any skill, of course, interactive communication is a skill. You can't do it without a certain amount of knowledge. It's like if we think about, for example, a speaking sub-skill of asking questions. The skill of asking questions you can't do if you don't have the knowledge of question formation, for example. So what I'm getting at here is teaching functional language. As we can see, the handbook recommends that. And yes, every single speaking sub-skill out there will have an associated set of functional language. You can see on screen here, we've got just a few, even all the sub-skills we've focused on today, there's a few featured here, and the associated functional language. And any good textbook should be providing you with this, and more importantly, providing your pupils with this. So how can we teach this? Or how can we get this into our pupils? Again, the idea that we tell our pupils to read it and then hope that they use it later on, either in the classroom activity, in the real world, or in the exam, I feel we need to do something more than that. We need to actively have a process, a deep cognitive process where our pupils are processing the language and then using it as well in class. So I'm going to show you an activity model that we can use to do that. So this activity now is called 3, 2, 1. And essentially how you begin is you have an activity that involves some sort of memorization or recall. I've quite simply just covered up the language here. I'll ask my pupils to complete the phrases, maybe feedback in pairs. We've got some functional language there, reacting to ideas. So yes, pupils, first of all, complete the phrases. So then we've done some activities in terms of memorization. And then what we ask is the first part, 3, 2, 1, which is our pupils getting into groups of 3. They get into groups of 3, again, after doing some work with the language, and then are given a list of questions. Now, what happens in this group? You have 3 students, A, B, and C. However, student A and B discuss for 2 minutes, so they're talking away. And what's happening is student C isn't participating in the discussion. They're listening and noting down, or maybe ticking off a list, the functional language that's used. Because then, once the 2 minutes are up, we have some lovely feedback. So student C will then say to student A and B, fantastic, you use this phrase, really well done. This phrase too as well. But the phrases they didn't say, student A and B then have an opportunity to say them in a further 1 minute time period. And then students switch roles as well. So this activity 3, 2, 1, I'm just going to, before I talk any more about it, I'll just let you refresh and recap on the steps. So yes, first and foremost, okay, we've looked at the language, the functional language of reacting to ideas. However, this model can be used for any kind of functional language, okay? And what's good about it is that, first of all, it's very student-centered, it's very student-led, it involves peer feedback as well. It's very much a case of you setting up the activity and the pupils going with it. And like I said, it involves memorization and then use as well immediately in the same lesson. Rather than asking your pupils just to read some material and hope they absorb it, this way you have a much, much better chance of them reproducing it in the future. So 3, 2, 1, that's the first activity that I wanted to show to you today, the use of functional language. Allow me to move on to the next activity. Again, I'm going to introduce the activity by focusing on the handbooks and the handbooks recommendations, and this in particular. So a topic that I can often see maybe not touched upon in class is the importance of listening in speaking. Of course, listening and speaking, they're complementary skills, and quite simply, you can't be good at speaking in the sense of, for example, responding to someone if you don't have the ability to listen well first. And in terms of seeing pupils in my class, in the exam, and most importantly, in real life, you can see this problem occasionally, learning set pieces. What I mean by that is maybe one of two things. The idea that I see some pupils memorizing huge chunks of language. Of course, memorizing words and small phrases is great, but trying to memorize huge chunks of language is, first of all, difficult. It's very unnatural. And in an exam context, it probably won't be looked too favorably by the examiner. So there's that. And also, what I also see is when pupils are engaging in some sort of a dialogue in classroom, you can often have one pupil who's not really listening to the other pupil. Instead, they're thinking about what they want to say. And then when they get invited to speak, the classic question of what do you think or what's your opinion? They speak, but they speak about what they were thinking about, what they planned to say, rather than actively referring to what their partner said. And again, using those interactive communication and oracy skills. Thank you, Maria. Apparently, Italian students have an ability to memorize huge chunks of text, which may be useful in some aspects of life, but unfortunately, we try and avoid that as much as possible in our classes. So, how to avoid this? How to encourage our pupils to listen naturally, listen actively in our classes? For me, this is the key. It's giving a purpose to our pupils' listening activity. We all know, as language teachers, which we all are, and probably most of us have been language learners at some point, that you listen best when you're listening for a reason, when there's a purpose, when there's motivation for listening. So we need to try and bring that into our activities as much as possible. But how do we do that? And more importantly, how do we do that in class? Let's have a look. Yes, thank you, Danielle. I'll just pick up on what you said. They have to learn to improvise and roll with the punches without being afraid of silly things. That can often be the biggest reason for our pupils perhaps memorizing text, is because of it's quite natural, having a fear of not being able to communicate. But yeah, filling our classes, filling our pupils with confidence and trying to move away from that is a good thing to do. But back to this activity, I remember talking about giving a purpose for listening. So if we look at a fairly regular task that we use in class all the time, for example, talking about your weekend in pairs, something you do classically on a Monday or Tuesday, yeah, it can work. Yeah, pupils can quite often be interested in what the other person's having to say, but they could also quite possibly not really listen here, because why are they listening? What's the purpose going on here? And with a small tweak of an activity like this, where you ask your pupils to find 3 things in common, that can instantly change the nature of this interaction, and more importantly, help our pupils listen more actively. Now there's a reason for me to listen. Okay, I have a task to complete. If I don't listen, I can't find 3 things in common. So think about tasks in class and how we can tweak them or manipulate them in order to develop these interactive communication and oracy skills. And likewise, we've looked at tasks. Let's also think about book activities. So I'll just give you 5 seconds or 5-10 seconds to read and understand this activity on screen. So yes, what the idea is that 2 pupils, they look at the same picture, they both make notes together, and then they're going to plan a conversation. So that's a kind of a nice activity. And again, yeah, it could fully work. But in order to maximize the chances of developing interactive communication and most importantly, active listening skills, why don't we make changes like this? So what we've done there is now each pupils, for example, me and Donya, we have different pictures. Me and Donya have different sets of notes. And yes, we're going to have the same thing. We're going to plan a conversation. However, what's going to happen is I'm not going to show Donya my picture, nor my notes. I'm going to verbally communicate them to Donya, and she's going to do the same. Again, we've instantly given that purpose for listening, that reason for listening that was perhaps lacking beforehand. And yeah, encouraging, gently forcing, doesn't know how you want, depends how you want to say it, but encouraging our pupils to then listen to one another as well. Yeah, so I'm seeing ideas coming through, for example, Daniela, maybe just the simple act of students describing their pictures to one another and then perhaps both looking at that can work. But anything that gives that purpose for listening is a really, really nice idea. Just a few comments I want to pick up on as well. Information gap, okay. Thank you. I might be coming on to that, but information gap, this is kind of an information gap activity. So allow me to move on to your next task. With that in mind, let's look at it now in an exam context. Have a look at this activity here. This is the B1 Preliminary for Schools, part 3. And please just comment in the chat box about how can we change this task possibly to help our pupils listen more actively, please. Okay, so we've had some comments to begin with. Picture of their interest. Of course, personalization, that's a really nice idea. I think that was Stephanie, thank you. Allowing them to choose their own pictures, perhaps. Again, creating that interest, that motivation for listening by having something personal to them. Make it about them. Thank you, Cecilia, as well. So yeah, have a think about perhaps the materials or the rubric, the words. How can we change it to help people listen more actively? Lots of people saying, yes, basing on your own experience, relating with their own routine. What can you do? Okay, yeah. Perhaps before they even do this activity, they could ask each other, what can you do? What can we both do? What can we both not do? Telling a story based on the pictures. Thank you. That's really, really nice, perhaps. So perhaps one pupil could have the pictures. They tell a story based on the pictures without saying that the words of the actual pictures themselves, and the other pupil has to guess what the pictures might be. Okay, so thank you. We're going to move on now. Information exchange. Thank you. I can't remember who said it, but yes, this is an example, what I have on screen now, of an information exchange. So what I've done is I've taken the original exam material, you can see at the top, and now I have 2 worksheets, A and B. And for example, I'm student A, Donya's student B. Donya has pictures that I don't have, and vice versa. I have pictures that Donya doesn't have as well. So what does that mean? That means we're actively having to listen to each other more. I mean, you could even do this as a pre-exam task. You could ask people to describe to each other what pictures they have, and they could draw them in or complete them. Totally up to you. But again, what we've done here is giving a purpose of listening, and this is the classic example of what an information exchange or gap is. Just to explain what it is, it's this idea. But yes, we're both working together to complete a task, but you have information that I don't have, and vice versa. So what it does is this, it helps develop those active listening skills. If we want to complete the task successfully, I have to listen to my partner. And it helps avoid those conversation monologues where speaking is pre-planned. They're not really listening to their partner. And of course, ultimately, what we're here for today is improving that interactive communication ability as well. So yes, this is a nice idea if you want to develop, encourage your pupils to listen better in class. So we've looked at the handbook. We're going to move on to the next place in which you can find activities for your class, and that's online resources. Now, Cambridge has a wealth of online resources, and a good place to start would be this Learning English directory here. So at the webpage, you can see at the bottom of the screen now, you can go and search for activities, for things to do in your class, depending on skill and depending on level. Of course, we're looking at speaking today, we're looking at independent level. If we choose those two, and for example, press search, activities get brought up that are relevant to us. So we're focusing on interactive communication today. It will be a case of simply choosing the activities that are most relevant to you. But yes, Cambridge has lots of online resources, starting with here, and also some others that I wish to highlight now are some of my favourite resources that can be found in the Teacher Resource Finder. And that's like posters with lesson plans, the self-study speaking lesson plans, and my ultimate favourite resource, and that is here, the Classroom Warmers activity booklet. Just to give you a brief example of what the Classroom Warmers activity booklet offers. Activities like this. So these are 3 activities that look to develop interactive communication skills: just a minute, yes, no game, and 2 true, 1 false. You can see here the skills are clearly highlighted, so you know which activities suit you or the skills you want to develop best. Are the resources free, Eleonora? Yes, they are. And what we're going to do now actually is see one of them in action: 2 true and 1 false. So we're going to have a live demonstration with none other than our very own Donya. So Donya's going to come on screen in a short while, but first of all, I just want you to have a look at the steps of the activity. So yes, what's going to happen here is Donya's provided me with 3 phrases. Okay, 2 of them are true and 1 is false. And I'm going to take just 2 minutes. Normally it would be 3 minutes. Just 2 minutes to question Donya and try to try to work out what I think is the false sentence. So, so that you can participate at home as well, these are the 3 sentences on the screen now. I will ask that you don't comment in the chat box. Just think to yourself which one could be false, A, B, or C. So, Donya, thank you for agreeing to do this. Okay. I'm going to ask you questions for a couple of minutes. I'm very looking forward to this one. Are you ready?
I'm ready, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Right, Donya, and so here we go with the 2 minutes. So first of all, tell me, where did you meet the Queen, Donya?
It was a really long time ago. I think I was about 8 years old or something. And it was at the Royal Windsor Horse Show, which happens, I think it happens once a year.
Oh, right, okay. Why were you there? Were you riding or just watching? Or
No. My dad actually was working there, and so he took me along, so I was able to watch, and I met the Queen there.
And you met the Queen there. Okay, yeah. Fine. Let's move on to swimming with sharks. Where did you do that, please, Donya?
It was in Malaysia, and it was specifically at the Perhentian Islands.
Oh, at the Perhentian Islands. Okay, and when you say you swam with sharks, did you literally swim with sharks, or how did it happen?
There were just baby sharks in the sea, and we were swimming in the sea, and someone said, "Oh, there are baby sharks here," and we were just swimming among them.
Okay, so it wasn't like you going into a cage and them swimming around you, that sort of thing. Okay,
it was natural.
Well, it's dangerous, I thought. Okay, fine. Reese Witherspoon, you served cheese. Why did you only serve cheese to Reese Witherspoon? What was the situation there?
So many years ago, before I became a teacher, before I did my CELTA, I worked in a deli where we served cheese and meat. And the deli was in Notting Hill in London, where you get lots of famous people. And one of my one of my customers was Reese Witherspoon.
Okay, right. Did you recognise her straight away, or?
Yeah, I did, because she's very famous in the UK, so I knew who she was straight away.
Okay, thank you. Right, Donya, I'd love to have another minute to grill you, but I don't, unfortunately. So what we're going to ask now is that I know some of you are commenting in the chat box, but we're actually going to turn this into a poll. I want you now to put your answers. Which one do you think is false, please? Okay, so Donya had 3 sentences there. Swimming with sharks so far is leading. People seem to believe you've met the Queen, Donya. Okay.
I guess you don't, by your reaction.
Yeah. Okay, so just let's say 5 more seconds or so. Get your answers in. Which one is Donya fibbing about, please?
Shall I tell you?
Well, I'll quickly end the poll there.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So just 47% think you haven't swum with sharks, 31% think you haven't served cheese to Reese Witherspoon, 23% think you haven't met the Queen. I think you haven't met the Queen, Donya.
Well, the teachers in this webinar know me better than you know me, Greg, clearly, because I haven't swum with sharks. I have met the Queen.
Oh, wow, you have met the Queen.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wow, I wish we had more time to talk about that, Donya. But
another time.
After the webinar, another time. Donya, thank you very much. Everybody, round of applause for Donya, please.
Thank you.
So, yes, that activity, Truth and a Lie, you see what happens there in terms of interactively communicating. There was lots going on between me and Donya because, again, we had that purpose for speaking. My obviously purpose was to work out what Donya was lying about, and her purpose was to throw me off and misled me, which she did very, very well. So, online resources, we've looked at that. We've looked at the handbook. The final thing I would like to show you today is the following. Using speaking test videos with examiner content in class. So on YouTube, Cambridge has plenty and plenty of speaking test videos with real candidates in a speaking test, and it's also accompanied with speaking examiner comments. And these can be something really, really useful for us in class in order to make really evident to our pupils what interactive communication looks like in the exam. So what we're going to do now is do a task that I would do with my pupils in class, and that is assess a candidate's interactive communication performance. So on screen here, we can see 2 candidates, Roberto and Simone. You're going to focus on Simone, please. Okay, and what I want you to do is to watch him do this exam task. It's a part 3. And think about these 5 questions. Does he initiate discussions, respond appropriately, maintain the conversation, develop the conversation, and negotiate an outcome? What I'd like you to do is not put any answers in the chat box, but think about these 5 questions and think about whether he does them well, okay, not so well, good examples of language he uses. Just think about, form a general overview, a general opinion of how you think Simone does in terms of interactively communicating with Roberto. So I'm going to keep the questions to the side for you to see, and I'm going to play the video now. So just think about those questions, and generally, how do you think Simone did?
Now, in this part of the test, you're going to talk about something together for about 2 minutes. I'm going to describe a situation to you. Some students from a small village school are going on a trip to their capital city. Here are some of the activities they could do there. Talk together about the different activities they could do in their capital city and say which would be the most interesting. All right? Now talk together.
So I think going to the gallery could be an option, but
it could
maybe
be boring,
it's a boring
at the same time.
Yeah, a bit boring.
What about visiting an ancient castle?
Yeah, I think that could be nice because you get to know more about the culture of the city, watching an ancient monument. Or maybe also going to the stadium. Yeah, they could also go to the stadium. Because it's more entertaining, you see more action.
Yeah, they can have fun, they can eat together.
Yeah. But maybe going to the football stadium, you can do that in every city, while I don't know, going to the having a visit of the city with a bus. You can't do it everywhere because every city is different. It
gives you the opportunity to see the city better. But what about the transport museum?
I think that could be an interesting visit because you get to see old things which are maybe typical from the city.
And what about the going shopping, going to the markets?
I think that could be nice because you get to buy stuff which is typical from the place.
They could buy gift for their
gifts
friends,
for their friends,
their family.
Or maybe also going to the zoo, but maybe I don't know.
Because there are zoos everywhere in every city, so you can't learn more about the city you're visiting. So I think the bus
the bus visit is the most unique thing to do.
Thank you.
Okay, so what I would like to do is that you've thought about those questions. Just take a moment now, please. Just think. Stop that. Just to think to yourself, how do you think he did generally? How do you think he did? Did he initiate well? Did he respond well? Just think to yourself in your head. How do you think he did? And then I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Compare your ideas of how you felt Simone did to the examiner comments as well, please. Okay, so I'll just pick up on a few of the comments you're going to put there. You felt that Simone developed well. He initiated well, most people. He tries to continue the conversation. Roberto dominates. Okay. Definitely speaks more, Roberto, that's for sure, yeah. Roberto's answers were more complex. Okay, so yeah, I broadly agree with what you're saying there, and pretty much what the examiner's comments say there is that Simone, I thought he was very good at asking questions, of course, and inviting his partner to speak, and he generally reacts well to it. However, as someone picked up on there, Roberto says more than Simone, I think because Simone keeps asking him questions and maybe doesn't give his own input, which is what the examiner can say on screen there. Something the examiner's comments don't mention there, but I think he did well. He helped negotiate an outcome as well, which is a really, really important thing to do. As we've spoken about already, negotiating is an important part of interactive communication. So he answered yes or no and asked in response, yes, Nadia. I think the key thing here we're all touching upon is perhaps he could have developed his own answers a bit better. So using speaking test videos with examiner comments in class, I'm going to just give you a few seconds just to read what you can see on screen now. This is the steps I would use in class normally. So yes, what I would thoroughly recommend is this type of activity is really good for our pupils because it really lays bare exactly what interactive communication looks like, the good and the bad in an exam. Sometimes you can talk about it in class and class activities and people maybe kind of know what you're talking about, that it's the ability to be social and to speak to the other person, but what exactly are they looking for in the exams? And so it's really, really nice to do that. I would recommend that when the first few times you do this, you use a longer process like this. In this process here, of course, you're working together, you're bringing it together with the whole class feedback. You're sort of guiding them, especially to begin with, through the ability of assessing interactive communication. But in time, you can shorten this process. I did note down an idea from, I think, Yaina, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, where you can do speaking test activity videos where you pause the video after the question, pupils do it themselves, and then they watch this video and compare themselves against the people in the video, which is really, really nice. So yes, I do think speaking test videos with examiner comments are really, really useful and encourage, and try to use them in class with your pupils as much as possible. One thing, especially when you start, of course, you want to use a longer process, and I would recommend simplifying the criteria for your pupils as well. Often this column here that you find in the marking criteria may be confusing for your pupils, especially if they're lower levels or younger learners as well. So simplify them in the form of questions somehow. So quite quickly, 1 more minute and then I have time for questions, please. A recap on today. So of course, my definition I was using today for interactive communication, RSC, successfully interacting with another person. And that's these 5 general themes here: initiating, responding, maintaining, develop, and negotiating. And from these 5 themes, we can draw out some of the speaking sub-skills that should be present in any activity that develops interactive communication. Remember, it's important in real life. The majority of times in which you speak is in a dialogue, using those interactive communication skills. So that's why it's important. And that's really, of course, Cambridge English does give your pupils an exam qualification, but most importantly, it prepares them for real life. And don't forget the various places in which we can find practical classroom activities, a handbook, lesson plans and guide, online resources, and example videos as well. So thank you very much. And I'd now like to invite Donya back for any questions.
Thanks a lot, Greg. That was, it was brilliant. So many practical ideas there for teachers to take away and try with their learners. So that's wonderful. As Greg said, now is the time for questions. So if you have any specific questions, please type them in the Q&A box and we'll see how many we can get through. There were some questions earlier on in the webinar about the number of students in a class. And you mentioned, Greg, the importance of having at least 2 students talking together or talking in groups. So there are questions about, what about in a one-to-one class when there's only 1 student? What tips can you give?
Yes, so in terms of having a one-to-one class, I think teachers' fear generally is the fact that you're supposed to be there and assessing what their speaking's like. But if you participate in the conversation, how can you assess? But I mean, what I would do from previous experience, of course, you have to participate. Like I said, it has to be a collaborative activity in terms of developing interactive communication. So participate with them. That's going to do really nice things to begin with in terms of building up your rapport and building up their confidence of speaking with someone with a high level of English. What I would do while you're doing that, a nice idea is to record yourself. You can either do that through an audio file or perhaps through video, because then that will give you the ability to maybe during the lesson or after the lesson assess how they got on. Sometimes it's a nice activity to do it in class with your pupils, guide them through what they've said and where they could have done better, what they did well. Once they get over listening to their own voice, then it's a really, really nice activity to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few different questions that are sort of around the same topic of improving motivation and self-esteem. So what about students who are quite shy or, even in their first language, they don't like speaking, they're quiet students. How can you encourage that interaction?
Okay, well, it's a matter of confidence, of course. If someone's shy, they're lacking confidence. And I think it's very much long-term processes in your class. There's no instant trick or activity that's going to change that. Instead, you need to have the right basics in place. And I think the key one for me is a positive atmosphere in your classroom, one in which pupils are praised for speaking out, for particularly good examples of speaking, or just for trying anything really. It's important that your pupils feel safe, comfortable, and then naturally in time, you'd like to think that increase their the confidence of their speaking as well. The activity I just said as well can sometimes help, recording themselves, listening back. A lot of pupils, myself included, when I've learned Spanish, think that I'm not a great speaker, but don't listen to myself back. Then you can hear yourself and you do produce some really good stuff. So that might be a nice activity. And although I said there's no one trick to help improve a student's confidence, if you want people to speak a bit louder, perhaps you can have light music in the background. That can often help to encourage our pupils to speak a bit louder and with a bit more confidence too.
Definitely. And I do think the activities that you recommended earlier about having information gap fill, those are really great tasks for students who are shy, because essentially they're given the material to talk about. So it's more about completing the task rather than worrying about what they're saying. So yeah, give some of those activities a try and see if they make a difference.
Yeah, I suppose giving them the information gap as well, you're kind of empowering them. The fact that now people are, they're listening to people, they have information that others need. It actively puts them in that situation where they have something that someone else needs, and likewise that should bring some more confidence.
Absolutely. Oh, this is an interesting question. Someone said, first of all, thank you for your brilliant presentation. My question is, what's more important between fluency and accuracy in a situation of communication?
Ooh, big question there. Okay. In terms of a situation, they're both important, of course. You won't want to say one's more important than the other.
No, definitely not.
You can't really say that. They're both equally.
That is reflected in the exam criteria. You know, that's why we wanted to have a webinar focusing on interactive communication, because fluency and getting your message across really on a real life scale is more important. If you speak a foreign language, like Greg said, he speaks Spanish. I had a go at speaking Spanish, not very successfully, but the most important thing in getting your message across is the key words, isn't it? It's your message rather than the accuracy. So you might argue that fluency is more important.
Yeah, you could possibly say that, Don. Yeah, that's I don't know. I think accuracy is, it just goes hand in hand. That's the thing, isn't it, Don? You know, like, it just goes hand in hand. One thing directly affects the other. So
exactly. I think that's the most important thing to remember, is you have to focus on all of it as a whole and not just on one. I think sometimes we as teachers can focus more on accuracy, maybe because, you know, it can be simpler. You can give students a gap fill and they fill in all the correct form of a verb and the past tense, and it's students like accuracy because it's something they can sit down and learn. But fluency is something that just has to be practiced and practiced and practiced. So yeah, as you said, Greg, they go hand in hand. So you must practice both of them in your classes. Yeah. Okay. Oh, there's lots of questions all of a sudden. I don't know if we're going to be able to answer them all. Oh, okay. There's lots of questions here about the resources. So I will post in the chat box once again a link to the resources where you can find all of the resources for both exams. And there are also more questions about certificates and having access to the recording. So I said it at the beginning, but those of you who might have missed it, you'll be sent an email with a link to the recording so you can watch it all again. And there's an interesting question here about, is it different now in the time of social distancing? Some classes are still online. Can we still teach interactive communication in the same way?
For me, yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, actually. Yeah, for me, it's very similar. Of course, you're not physically in the same room, but technology now does bring us closer together. And arguably, the fact that now, because at the moment, what you can see, Donya, is pretty much just my head. What it does remove, say, when you're online, it actually removes things like body language. So I find that actually encourage our pupils to take more of a focus on interactive communication and possibly develop it more, because the physicality and body language and things like that's been removed out of it. So arguably, some people would say that medium will help improve it even more. But certainly, if you look at some of those activities we did today, I've done them all online. We've just done them together pretty much. They're 2 truths and 1 lie activity. That can easily be done online. So it won't make much of a difference. And arguably, we'll actively encourage them to interact.
That's a really good point about having more of a focus on it, because like you say, it's harder, so you have to concentrate on it more. I suppose the thing to note there is that it can therefore be a bit more tiring, so maybe be a bit more patient or expect a bit less.
Possibly, yeah, that's it. I mean, if you really want to push them, what you can do, of course, is, I don't know how, it depends on what the policy of the school is, but you can actually ask them to turn their cameras off. When they turn their cameras off and they're purely relying on listening skills, is what we spoke about earlier, it's quite a nice idea, actually pushing those interactive communication skills even more, not relying on gestures and facial reactions and things like that.
Great. Right, Greg, that's been so useful. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our hour. So yeah, thank you so much for all your brilliant ideas, Greg, and to all the teachers for such brilliant participation. Yeah, and all your ideas as well, and sharing with each other. That's just as useful as getting information from us. So thank you, and we really hope that we'll see you at the next webinar. Please go onto our website and have a look at what's coming up. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tanya. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.